Fiction doesn't always crawl out of the shadows. Sometimes fiction takes inspiration from the most haunting reality. Horror movies love to scare us with monsters, demons, and things that go bump in the night. But sometimes the truth is far more terrifying. Behind a few of the most famous films ever made stand real-life killers, people who walked the same streets we do. In the next 15 minutes, we're pulling back the curtain on every horror movie rooted in the crimes of actual serial killers. The Zodiac Killer never vanished from history. He dissolved into myth. The film Zodiac reopens the wound, not with cheap shocks, but with a suffocating sense of obsession. Directed by David Fincher, it drags viewers through decades of fear and paranoia in San Francisco, a city haunted by letters written in blood-soaked arrogance. The killer mocked police, newspapers, and the public with ciphers and promises of slaughter. And he lived for the game more than the bodies. What makes the movie terrifying is not gore. It is silence. The film stalks through basements, empty rooms, and shifting shadows, letting dread breathe. Real names like Robert Graysmith, Paul Avery, and Inspector David Toschi bleed into the narrative, anchoring the story in truth. Unlike so many horror films, Zodiac does not give closure. There is no final scream, no handcuffed monster paraded under flashing lights. The real killer was never caught. The film ends the way the case did, hanging in the air, unresolved, a question mark that keeps you questioning your surroundings. In that unfinished ending lies its cruelty. It forces you to admit that sometimes evil never answers for what it does. It simply walks away. Aileen Wuornos, a drifter and sex worker who became one of America's most infamous female serial killers. In the late 1980s, Wuornos walked the highways of Florida, selling sex to survive. Beneath her hardened exterior was a storm of anger and despair, a life of abuse and abandonment that twisted her view of the world. The film follows her after she meets Selby Wall, a lonely young woman who becomes her lover. For the first time, Wuornos believes she has found someone who sees her as more than disposable. But to hold on to Selby and to escape the constant cycle of poverty, Aileen turns to violence. She begins killing the men who pick her up, luring them with the promise of sex before pulling out a gun. At first, she insists it is self-defense, that the men attacked her. But as the bodies pile up, it becomes clear the killings are driven not just by fear, but by rage and desperation. Her crimes grow reckless. Police close in. Selby, terrified of being implicated, begins to distance herself. Aileen feels the betrayal cutting deep, but she clings to her illusion of love even as everything unravels. Authorities track her down, and the woman who once seemed untouchable is suddenly cornered, powerless, and exposed. The film does not let her go quietly. It ends with the image of a woman stripped of all illusions, awaiting execution. Ted Bundy is already infamous when No Man of God begins. The film does not waste time showing his crimes. Instead, it places him inside the concrete walls of a prison, waiting for death. What follows is not blood on screen, but a psychological cage match. FBI agent Bill Hagmaier, played with quiet restraint by Elijah Wood, is sent to interview Bundy in the late 1980s. The government wants insight into the mind of a predator, and Hagmaier becomes the man chosen to sit across from the killer who had turned murder into ritual. The film unfolds almost entirely in those interviews. Bundy sits with his hands folded, smiling with that rehearsed charm that once lured women to their deaths. But the smile never softens the air. He circles questions, teases details, drops fragments of truth only when it benefits him. Every pause feels like a weapon. He knows his time is short, but he also knows the world is still listening. In those silences, Bundy forces Hagmaier and us to feel the weight of his control. What makes the story more suffocating is the strange bond that forms between the two men. Hagmeyer is calm, patient, trying to draw Bundy out without letting himself fall into the killer's orbit. Yet Bundy pushes, prods, and manipulates. He admits to things only in half-formed riddles, leaving just enough to confirm what everyone already suspected. The scale of his crimes was even darker than reported. By the time Bundy begins to confess pieces of his brutality, the tension has already drained the room of oxygen. There are no escape scenes, no reenactments of screaming victims. Instead, the terror comes from the realization that Bundy's real cruelty was not just in the killings, but in the way he fed on attention, on power, on the act of making people listen. The climax arrives as execution comes closer. Bundy begins to unravel, begging for more time, trying to twist the system even in his final days. But the end comes all the same. The electric chair waits, and Bundy, for all his manipulations, cannot escape it. Alaska looks endless, white and pure, but beneath that ice lay the hunting grounds of Robert Hansen. The frozen ground turns his crimes into a chilling manhunt, and unlike many films about serial killers, it does not flinch from showing the predator's twisted patience. Hansen abducted women, often sex workers, flew them into the wilderness, and hunted them as if they were animals. He buried his secrets in frozen soil, believing the snow would keep them forever. Nicolas Cage plays the state trooper determined to stop him, while John Cusack takes the role of Hansen, cold and meticulous. The film is painted with bleak skies and lifeless landscapes, showing how isolation can become a weapon. What burns through is the terror of survival, embodied by Vanessa Hudgens' portrayal of Cindy Paulson, one of the few women who escaped Hansen's grip. Her testimony cracked his mask of normalcy and brought the hunter down. The movie captures that unbearable truth. For some killers, the act of ending life is not enough. They need the fear, the panic, the struggle. They need to watch hope die before the body does. Quentin Tarantino's film lives in bright colors, neon lights, and a haze of nostalgia. But its roots are planted in one of the darkest crimes of the 20th century, the Manson family murders. In 1969, actress Sharon Tate and several others were slaughtered in their own home by followers of Charles Manson, a cult leader who manipulated drifters and dreamers. Tarantino takes history and bends it into fantasy. Instead of ending in blood-soaked tragedy, his film gives Tate and her friends a miraculous survival, while the killers face brutal justice at the hands of fictional characters. But underneath the revision lies the true shadow. The fact that Manson's power came from persuasion, not strength. He turned young lives into instruments of violence, proving that charisma can be as deadly as a knife. The movie dances on the edge of history, but even in its alternate ending, the darkness seeps through. You cannot watch without remembering what really happened on Cielo Drive, without hearing the echoes of screams that Hollywood lights could never erase. Tarantino may have rewritten the night, but the true evil lingers outside the frame. A world where blind devotion can be commanded by a man who promised nothing but chaos. If you're enjoying this, well, guess what? This ride is only going to get even more thrilling from here. So before we jump on to the next one, why don't you take a moment to like, share, and subscribe? Monsters are not always born with knives in their hands. Sometimes they grow slowly, quietly, in the empty halls of adolescence. My Friend Dahmer does not show Jeffrey Dahmer as the butcher of men he would later become, but as the awkward boy wandering the fluorescent-lit corridors of high school in Ohio. The film, adapted from the graphic memoir of Dahmer's classmate John Backdorf, studies him before the headlines, when the sickness had not yet erupted into murder, but already spread through his mind like rot under skin. Ross Lynch plays Dahmer with a pale stillness that makes every glance unsettling. He collects dead animals, dissolving them in acid. He drinks heavily while still a teenager, stumbling through days with hollow eyes. The cruelty is not in what he does yet, but in what he carries inside him. His classmates laugh at his strange performances, his strange walks and moans, not knowing they are circling a future killer. What makes My Friend Dahmer so suffocating is its restraint. It does not show the killings. It shows the soil in which they grew. It lingers in silence, on the sound of a refrigerator humming in a lonely house, on the shadow of a boy who could have turned one way, but turned another. There is no gore, no blood, no police chase, only the dreadful knowledge that we are watching the cocoon form around something monstrous. Ted Bundy's name already reeks with infamy, but extremely wicked, shockingly evil and vile approaches him from the side. Rather than focusing on his murders, it forces us to see him through the eyes of Elizabeth Kloepfer, the woman who loved him, lived with him, and doubted him as the bodies piled up across America. Zac Efron plays Bundy with a venomous charm, the kind of smile that tricks you into believing every lie. He is not shown as a slasher in the woods or a man with blood dripping from his hands. Instead, he is clean-cut, handsome, and almost magnetic. That is where the terror lies. Bundy did not need shadows to hunt. He used daylight, parties, and false warmth. Women followed him willingly because he seemed safe. The film draws its name from the judge's own words at Bundy's trial, words that cut through the surface and labeled him for what he was. Behind the smiles, behind the soft voice, there was only cruelty. The movie does not show every brutal detail, but the wickedness presses in from the edges, reminding us that sometimes the devil does not appear as a monster at first glance. It appears as a lover, a friend, a neighbor. It asks you to trust it, and then it ends you. Highways can feel endless, but in Texas, a stretch of land became a graveyard. The Texas Killing Fields builds its story from the real cases of dozens of women who vanished along Interstate 45, their bodies later discovered in swamps, fields, and wastelands. For decades, these murders haunted the region, unsolved, layered with suspicion, with rumors of multiple killers using the same ground to hide their victims. The film follows two detectives, one local, one transplanted, as they claw through the muck of corruption, fear, and silence. Sam Worthington and Jeffrey Dean Morgan play men driven by different instincts, but both stalked by the same shadow, the fields themselves, where the earth seemed hungry for the dead. In the film's final stretch, the detectives close in on the killer after a brutal chase through the swamplands. The climax is muddy, desperate, and drenched in decay, showing the killer cornered but still dangerous until he is finally subdued. Justice comes, but it does not arrive clean. The girls who were lost do not return, and the fields remain scarred, their silence heavier than before. The movie ends with the uneasy truth that even when one predator is caught, the land still holds secrets, and not every ghost will ever be named. If there is a film that drips pure dread, it is Snowtown. Based on the Snowtown murders in South Australia, it tells the story of John Bunting, the man known as Australia's most notorious serial killer. This is not Hollywood gloss. This is kitchen table horror, shot in the bleak light of poverty and hopelessness. Bunting, played by Daniel Henschel, does not arrive like a storm. He arrives like a neighbor. He talks, he jokes, he eats with families. Slowly, he pulls young men into his orbit, shaping them with hatred, teaching them cruelty disguised as loyalty. His targets were people he despised, pedophiles, homosexuals, anyone he declared unworthy. He lured them in, tortured them, killed them, and sealed their remains in barrels later found in an abandoned bank vault. In the climax, Jamie is pulled fully into Bunting's murders, forced to take part in the torture and killing of people he once knew. The film shows him trapped, silent, watching as Bunting and his followers tighten their grip and leave no room for escape. The killings become colder, more mechanical, with bodies sealed in barrels and hidden away. By the end, Jamie is hollow, broken, carrying the weight of crimes he was dragged into, while the barrels wait in silence for the day they are finally uncovered. The film opens in Boston during the early 1960s, when women begin turning up strangled in their apartments. The murders are brutal, and the city sinks into fear. Loretta McLaughlin, played by Keira Knightley, is a reporter stuck writing about toasters and fashion. But she senses that the killings are connected. She pushes her editors to let her investigate, despite being dismissed in a newsroom that barely takes women seriously. As more women die, Loretta dives deeper, teaming up with fellow journalist Jean Cole, played by Carrie Coon. Together, they begin mapping the murders, recognizing the patterns the police are too slow or too careless to acknowledge. Their reporting pulls the case into the public eye, but it also draws threats. The film lingers on the pressure they face, not just from the killer's shadow, but from a system that wants them silent. The killings grow bolder, and Boston is paralyzed by dread. Loretta and Jean uncover evidence of police departments refusing to share files, of investigators tripping over each other, and of victims dismissed as if their deaths were inevitable. Their articles force the city to pay attention. The murders are not random. They belong to something larger, something systematic. The investigation eventually points toward Albert DeSalvo, who is arrested on unrelated charges before confessing to being the Boston Strangler. Yet the confession does not feel solid. He remembers details incorrectly. Some crimes, he claims, don't match his methods. Loretta realizes that while DeSalvo may have killed some women, he could not have killed them all. The terror lies in the cracks of the story, in the possibility that some of the faces behind the crimes were never revealed at all. That's it, folks. If you're into horror, true crime, or just love talking scary movies, make sure to hit that like button, share this with your friends, and subscribe. So, which movie do you think was the perfect adaptation of a real killer? Comment down below and let us know. We'd love to hear from you.